Hello, everyone. Welcome to the All Day Football Show. I am your host, Jackson Kellogg, and today we'll be going over my roster projections for the Patriots this season, basing off of the 80-man roster that is on there right now. Who do I think is going to make the team? Who do I think might make practice squad? Who starters will be? So, final roster includes 53 players, so that's all throughout all positions, offense, defense, special teams. This season, to accommodate for COVID and part of a new rule anyway, the practice squad has gone up from 10 to 12 players is what it was, and now it's 16 players maximum on the practice squad. So that leaves a total of 69 players under contract, kind of, and right now on the roster currently there are 69. So that leaves 21 players that will eventually not be any part of the Patriots anymore, 16 that will be part of the team but not on the actual roster, and 53 players that are on the final roster. So blue markings on player names are players that I project to be the starter possibly. So we'll get right into it with the quarterbacks. Right now there are 4 quarterbacks on the roster. I've got 3 quarterbacks making the final roster. Cam Newton, I think he's going to beat out Jarrett Stidham very, very slightly in camp. From what we've heard right now out of training camp is that Cam Newton's been very good. He looks healthy. He's been a team player, is what's been most important to the fans right now. Like I saw a thing where Jarrett Stidham threw a really nice ball in the back of the end zone to N'Keal Harry, like mossed J.C. Jackson. And one of the people who were cheering the most was Cam Newton, and he didn't even throw the ball. Like, he's been an absolute team player for that team. If Cam Newton doesn't win the job, it'll definitely be Jarrett Stidham, who showed he could beat out Brian Hoyer in camp last year. I think Brian Hoyer only makes it just because of COVID. You want to keep 3 players in case one goes down for injury or COVID. And Brian Lewerke, who is an undrafted free agent, I think will get cut in the end. I don't know if he'll make practice squad or not. So on to running backs. I've got 5 running backs making the final roster. Sony Michel, James White will be the starters. Sony Michel as like the pound it back, James White as the receiving back. Then the backup reps will split between Damian Harris, Rex Burkhead, and newly signed Lamar Miller. Brandon Bolden opted out of the season, which is partially why they signed Lamar Miller. Also, Sony Michel is on the physically unable to perform list after doing off-season foot surgery. So they brought in Lamar Miller. He's also on physically unable to perform, so we'll see how that goes. And I think cut from this team will be undrafted free agent J.J. Taylor, who I think might make the practice squad, but I don't think with the amount of running backs that they have competing for these spots, mostly veterans, I don't think J.J. Taylor will have a spot to make it on this team, which is a shame because he's such a good back. Moving on to fullback, it was going to be a battle between Jakob Johnson and Danny Vitale, but Danny Vitale decided to opt out of the season. So that job goes solely to Jakob Johnson to try and fill in for James Devlin after his retirement. Jakob Johnson came in last year from the international player program, and he showed flashes of being a really nice fullback until he went down with injury. So hopefully he stays healthy and can prove that he could be a very nice player for this team. At the wide receiver position, most of the time they'll have 4 to 6 wide receivers making a roster. Based off of our wide receivers' injury history, I'm going to go with 7 wide receivers making the final roster. Got Julian Edelman, N'Keal Harry, and Mohamed Sanu being the 3 starters there. From what it sounds like, they've all looked really well in camp. And then look for backups to be Jacoby Myers and Gunnar Olszewski, who were here last year. Showed great receiving ability, even though they're both undrafted. Damiere Byrd, who we signed this offseason, looks to be a deep threat down the field, as well as undrafted out of Miami, Jeff Thomas. So those guys, I think, will make the final roster with an opt-out of Marquise Lee that happened. He was going to be battling for one of those spots with Damiere Byrd and Jeff Thomas, but that's not happening after he opted out. And some of these other wide receivers who were long shots like Devin Ross, Will Hastings, and Isaiah Zuber. Maybe there'll be practice squad moves, but I don't see them making the final. Moving on to the tight end position, I think 3 pretty simple will make the final roster. We've got the 2 rookies from the 3rd round, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene. From what I've watched of camp so far, they've both looked really nice. I've got Devin Asiasi as the starter. I think that might change, to be honest. I've seen Ryan Izzo getting a lot of the early reps in camp, so look for him to maybe be the starter while the other 2 guys develop. Matt Lacoste opted out. I think that's partially because he saw that his job was vulnerable, so he decided to take the money and opt out. Cuts will include Jake Burt and Rashad Berry, who were undrafted this season, and recently signed Jordan Leggett. I honestly think that move is just for depth during camp. I don't see any of those guys making the final roster, and I think we'll go with the normal 3 tight ends. Now on to offensive line. This is where it gets bloody and long. So you've got your 5 starters: Isaiah Wynn, Joe Thuney, David Andrews, Shaq Mason. I think Yadni Kajust will beat out Corey Cunningham for the backup right tackle spot. And then backup O-line, you'll get Michael Onu, Justin Herron, who were just drafted, Corey Cunningham, who's been here for a while, and Tyler Gauthier, who we just signed. Cuts will include Jermaine Illuminor, who there's just too many bodies in the interior O-line for him to keep that job, and Hajalti Froholt, who we drafted, I believe it was last year. He didn't play well in camp last year. I don't think he'll do well enough this year to be able to keep a spot. And that's after opt-outs by Marcus Cannon and Najee Turan. So Marcus Cannon being the normal right tackle starter, he left that job open. Yadni Kajust, I believe, will take that spot for the season. Now on to defensive line. This isn't a very deep position, so I think they're going to try and keep as many players as they can from here with minimal cuts like Nick Thurman and Darius Kilgo, who they just signed recently for depth, but 7 defensive linemen with Lawrence Guy, John Simon, Adam Butler being those starters, with Bo Allen, Dietrich Wise, Byron Cowart, and undrafted free agent Bill Murray being rotational pieces behind them. I think Bill Murray will be that undrafted free agent who makes the roster every year. But 7 D-line allows them to have leeway with 3-4 and 4-3 fronts, which they like to go back and forth between depending on personnel, and they'll have the rotational pieces behind it to be able to do it. So similar to defensive line, you got 7 linebackers again. Jawan Bentley will be the mainstay in there, with Chase Winovich as well. Both of those guys will look to be leaders in a young linebacking core. Josh Uche, who we just drafted, along with Anthony Jennings, will be battling for reps. Brendan Copeland, who's been around for the most out of any of these players, not on the Patriots, but in the league, will look to also be a veteran piece. But because of how few linebackers there are, they'll keep more than they normally do. With Cash Maluia, who they drafted this year, making it, and Shuli Calhoun, who's had an injury history, making it. But that came at a cost of Dante Hightower opting out, and a lot of these linebackers will get cut, like Derek Rivers. He's had way too many chances, hasn't been able to stay healthy. Brendan King hasn't been able to stay healthy, but I think he might get injured reserve this year again. So he might not get cut per se, but he won't be playing this year. Terez Hall and Dejon Harris won't be anywhere close to the making the roster. At cornerbacks, 5 cornerbacks. This is the best secondary in the league, hands down, and it starts with these corners. The Patriots, I don't know why they do it, but they drafted Jawan Williams last year in the 2nd round to play corner, and he's 5th on the depth chart. And it's not that he hasn't played well in camp in either last year or this year so far. They just have that many bodies at the position that play well. Stephon Gilmore, reigning Defensive Player of the Year. J.C. Jackson, Jason McCourty, filing out those other 2 starting spots. Jonathan Jones coming in to play slot corner at times. All these guys have played well, and they've earned their spots on the roster, which is why players like Michael Jackson, who they just traded for, D'Angelo Ross, and Miles Bryant will not make the roster. There's no chance for them, no spots. Safety, 4 safeties will make it. Normally it'd be Patrick Chung in there, but with how this offseason has gone, he opted out as well. So Devin McCourty will be the starter there at free safety. Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips will be battling back and forth for those other 2 spots, or not other 2 spots, but reps between both of them to play strong safety. And look for Terrence Brooks to be get some minimal reps in there, but he hasn't looked the greatest in play, so I don't really want him in there, but I'm sure it'll happen at some point. Now, at special teams, you're like, where'd all the special teams go? Well, they're at the back. So 2 return specialists, Matthew Slater and Justin Bethel. Those guys were 2 of the best returner guys on the special teams last year, even in the league. Every time the Patriots had to punt, those 2 were down at the ball almost every time. It was crazy. So again, doing punting will be Jake Bailey in his second year. Patriots drafted a new kicker to replace Steven Gostkowski and Justin Rowauser, so we'll see how he does. And long snapper, as usual, is Joe Cardona. So that rounds out the 53-man roster. Some practice squad candidates look to see Deshaun Harris. Bill Murray, I actually think, will make the final roster, but even if he doesn't, he'll be a likely practice squad, seeing how they don't have a ton of depth at that spot on the defensive line. Hijalti Froholt, Jake Burt, Devin Ross, Will Hastings, Brian Lewerke, all these guys, either rookies or second-year guys who will look to be mainstay on the practice squad, so that they can at least have a chance if someone gets COVID or injured, they could come in and play. But that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you subscribe, leave a like, and have a nice day.